That's good.
and Privia, which was another one of the bright spots of what was, again, a pretty tough week for a lot of the names we follow. Do you want to give us a kind of quick overview of the Privia story and what their Q3 looked like?
Yep. So Privia, provider enablement platform, um, they continue to grow like a weed. It's kind of the long and short of it. They historically, I've made the comment on in Slack and on LinkedIn this week. It's a bit of an alignment journey where it's kind of a slow and steady wins the race play. They've got this great slide I always put in their investor slides that talks about the title is consistent growth and profitability across all cycles. And it's a really well done slide. It highlights pre-COVID 2018, 2019, they were in 4 or 5 states. They had fewer providers. COVID era, they grew into 7 states. Post-COVID 22, 23, they were at 13 states in 2023. And now they're up to 25 or 15 states in 2025. 5,300 implemented providers, 1,400 attributed lives, and they're kicking off meaningful cash flow. In 2024, they had $109 million of cash flow on 90 million of adjusted EBITDA. It's a 22% adjusted EBITDA margin. Like, it's a nice margin for a primary care adjacent business. 2025 is going to be 120 million at EBITDA. And so it's, again, also like alignment. In many ways, the core business is going so well. The questions aren't really about the core business. It's about how do you keep growing this and can you grow it faster? So with the core business being, hey, we help primary care. Like, we go into a state, we've got our medical group, we form a TIN, we help enable practices in fee-for-service and value-based care, but historically they've always been the fee-for-service focus in one play, right? Like they coined the phrase, it's called risk for a reason, which was their kind of counter-cyclical play in the sector over the last few years. And uh, I mean, they've gone very well. They focused their earnings call kind of on two things, one of which was their solid performance in risk-based contracts, which is interesting to get into given what I just said about that quote of it being called risk for a reason. But they cited their 2024 MSSP performance. It looks really good. And then their acquisition of Evolent's ACO business that they announced back in September, they acquired that for $100 million, $13 million earnout for pending on 2025 stars performance. And I think this Evolent ACO acquisition is a really interesting example of this question of like how they choose to, okay, you're generating all this free cash flow. How are you going to choose to allocate that free cash flow to continue growing this business moving forward? And they allocated a large chunk of it to bringing in this business that they value-based care ACO platform. And so there was some interesting dialogue in the earnings about how Privia's long-term growth algorithm is still 1 to 2 markets a year in this kind of Privia full model where they go in with a medical group, single TIN, et cetera. But they did enter 6 new states via this Evolent ACO. But they called that the light model because it's just an ACO they're entering with. And they're going to go seek to bring those docs into Privia's model over time. And so that's to me, that is the most interesting part of this story to watch moving forward is how well does that playbook work? Because I'm sure, as you know, like when you're working with providers and medical groups like this, behavior change and getting them to practice to the standards you want, like that is a lot of what you're trying to figure out. And when you've got a model that's working and you adjust to a model that is new for your organization, like there's a lot of questions in that,
Yeah, the acquisition makes a lot of sense. The
Mhm.
the driver of the acquisition, like a question I would, I guess, pose to you is, there's one story you tell, which is that they're interested in kind of diversifying what their book looks like, helping, round out this like mostly fee for service with this interesting ACO business that they feel like they got for a good price. And the other part of it, though, is that physicians are a pretty scarce resource, especially primary care physicians. And so the thing I wonder is to what degree was this maybe the largest bite at the apple for primary care physicians that they would get?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know if it's the largest. Um, it certainly is not a small group, right? Um, like one of the analysts on the earnings call mentioned they think that Evolent ACO had a 220 million partial cap contract with Blue Cross in North Carolina that Privia is assuming is part of this. That's a meaningful book of business to take on for Privia moving forward. So it's as I listen to them talk about their acquisition strategy, I do think it feels pretty opportunistic to me. Like they are out there, they talk about they feel like they get to see every deal that comes to market, and they are looking for reasonably priced assets as they come to market. And so um I gotta imagine this checked the boxes of it's reasonably priced. We're getting a big book of business is geographically where we want to be playing and how we think about that. And it's largely MSSP focused where we've had the success and it gives us opportunity to move forward. And I think also importantly in this narrative is it's not global cap. Like I think about go back to Humana acquiring the Villages Health. And like the Villages was a big business too, right? And it's a big business off of global cap contracts with the Medicare Advantage population, which previous whole narrative is basically like for us. And I
Yeah.
think that's right. Like, as I think about Privia's theory of the case, like going back to not understanding Clover's theory of the case all that well and that making me skeptical, Privia's theory of the case of value-based care of we think the right position for VBC is shared risk between payers, providers, and us to help manage that across. I buy that. Like that logically makes sense to me and hold water as a narrative where I'm like, yeah, that does seem like a healthy spot for the place for the space to be moving forward. And it seems like Privia, if I'm Privia, I'm taking and running with that narrative because you've got the space retracting from value-based care broadly as everybody's gotten scared off by global cap stuff. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but that doesn't negate the entire premise of VBC, right? It's about alignment of incentives. And we got over our skis here, but we've actually now got an opportunity to buy up all these practices where they were talking in the earnings call about how a lot of primary care practices don't see any more capital flowing into them because investors are looking elsewhere now. And I'm like, yeah, seems like now's the time to go buy up those groups. Um,
Yeah. Who
and
who are you competing for deals with besides United, right?
I don't, I don't, I mean, I don't know. Um, I don't know if there's private equity groups looking at the space. I don't know if there's other enablement plays that are looking at the space. I don't know if it would be out there right now, you know?
Yeah.
It makes, I mean, it makes sense to me. It's been an interesting dialogue. I'd be curious your perspective on all of this, but one of the things that I became accustomed to hearing over the last 5, 10 years in the BBC space is that to operate in BBC, you can't have one foot in both canoes. Like you've got to just be aligned to BBC incentives because if you've got fee for service incentives in your practice, you're going to get all squirrely and not be able to actually operate BBC well. And yet here you've got Privia operating in both clearly, seemingly performing well in MSSP program. And like as they were doing their last earnings call, they're talking about how um, they are like for the providers, they are helping them. I think they talked about changing it from like Uber Basic to the high end Uber by changing out the engine of the car so that the driver makes more money on the rides. And I'm like, that seems like a very fee for service medicine type play. And I like it's interesting to see them doing so well on both sides of that, given the conflicting narratives to me.
Yeah. I think that we're as we sort of end the era, like the go-go days of global cap contracts, where that was like a there was just so much money floating around that the fee for service mentality um in a in a ACO is like not the end of the world. Like the global cap stuff involved a lot of primary care doctors having to go and stretch outside of a normal sort of primary care role. And so, you had like doctors looking at like leakage reports, like we don't want to refer outside of the system and all of this stuff. And the thing that is to me, I haven't followed, I think, Privia as closely as you, but the thing that when I listen to Privia's earnings calls, it's like, oh, these are just really good operators. And if you're a really strong operator in a fee for service or a, like ACO, MSSP thing, like you can have really great results. Like it's not, I don't think that there's a lot of doctors who are in a fee for service contract and are like, oh, like let me constantly figure out how I can spend more. Like the actual incentives though are being thoughtful about the actual operations of the clinic and getting people in and out and managing schedules and staffing and all of the stuff that is really, really hard to do, but isn't like in any way glamorous and isn't as cool as like, we got this, CAF contract and we're investing in like home health aides and we're partnering with Lyft to like bring people to the clinics. It's like, what's our schedule? How full is our schedule? And are we following up with people and stuff like that?
Yep. I mean, it all tracks. And so it's going to be interesting to continue watching the Privia narratives because they seem very well positioned right now in the primary care landscape. They've got free cash flow coming in the door. And I would think that should allow them to continue selectively making these acquisitions as long as they are doing that right. I mentioned in the newsletter the other weekend a pillow that I jokingly like that is happiness is positive cash flow. Privia is there. And so as long as they can keep acquiring things that are added to cash flow, which like seems like they should be able to given state of market and their approach to taking risk. What stops that business? I don't know. Eventually over time you grow big enough that cash flow erodes and starts dwindling away. But I think they're on a good trajectory to be around for a long time, which is a cool spot.
I think that it's an interesting exercise to like what stops that cash flow. And as a general observation this year, it's been really good to be in care delivery and really bad to be a payer. And neither of those are, permanent states of the world. Like they go back and forth. And I am curious to see what happens in conversations between payers and providers next year because the payers can't afford another 2025.
For sure. But this is actually where it gets really interesting to me, right? Because play that out, like Privia is they are sitting there. So imagine like payer provider, like payers looking at a local market that Privia is in. And they're saying, okay, we want to manage down costs. Privia is sitting there saying, hey, we're the independent primary care group that actually gives you good results. And we'll take on risks when it's like shared upside for both of us. So it actually does you better. I would think that if anything, they're the provider group who is positioned to succeed in those contracts because the payer is going to come and say, we're getting raked over the coals by, health system in town. And, oh, like you're giving us better rate for primary care access. Like, yes, please. So to me, it's an interesting dynamic in that way where if that does play out, I think it actually plays out in Privia's favor on a relative basis to other care delivery assets, which is why I'm like they just need to keep going on this primary care front. If anything, I think they've got a really long trajectory ahead. And they talked about this on the earnings call about density in the local markets. And I assume they are thinking about like, how do we get into various specialties? They're asking about ancillary relationships. They had a partnership with a ASC company a couple years back. They're gonna run out of territory to grow into at some point, and they're gonna have to start growing deeper. And at some point in the future, this is a long way out, it feels like they're gonna become the health system of today. Like they're gonna grow so big, they're gonna negotiate contracts up a little bit by bit over time to where somebody else is gonna be able to come in and undercut them. Um, But to me, it doesn't seem like that's a short term. I think they've got a long runway ahead of. I don't know. That's just me trying to process it.
Yeah. It's just always like hard to wrap my mind around how a company can be generating so much positive cash flow and be have better rates. But I guess when you're going up against like a local monopoly,
This is. I think it's all relative, right? Like
yeah.
it does seem like they are. Okay, if I'm a payer and I could contract with the onesie twosie primary care doc on their own versus that primary care doc for Privia, I would have a hunch that when that doc goes into Privia, they're not quite as cheap anymore. I don't know what that delta is, but like I would assume Privia is slightly more expensive. So on a relative basis, Privia is more expensive than that independent primary care doc. But on a relative basis, they are also going to be, I would think, substantially less than the health system in town.
Yeah.
I don't know. So we'll see. We'll see how their trajectory works over time. We'll see what they choose to do strategically with it. Like, we saw when medical, how they chose to grow over time. They grew by like taking those health system rates, which is kind of the like fast forwarded version of that, where it's like, as soon as you start doing that, like it starts going sideways real quick. I think.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Enough speculating. It was a fun long week of earnings, and we'll do it again Q4 earnings season.
Yeah.
Right? All right.
It'll be great.
Hey, Martin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yep. Later.